A few people on now. I would like to introduce to everybody Dr. Tricia Jackson. She is the Director of Regenerative Ag at Prairie Food out of Kansas. We're super excited to have you on, Trish. And I wanted you to start out by giving a brief introduction of yourself, including some of your prior work in your education.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to you, just barely. My background is kind of interesting. For those of you who know me personally, you realize this, but I had the opportunity to travel a lot, especially in my younger years, in my 20s, and that really formed the way that I wanted to study the earth in graduate school. So my background in my educational career is in physical geography. And in physical geography, you study all the earth's natural systems and how they work together and how people influence those systems and how those systems also influence people. And so my first class in graduate school was a soils class. And from that moment on, I was hooked on soil. I couldn't wait to learn more. If you think about it, all of Earth's systems really have an interplay there. And that's where people and the earth have the most contact. And so that's why it was so fascinating to me. After graduate school, I got an assistant professorship at South Dakota State University. And that's a land grant institution like K-State is, for example. And I was able to do a lot of research with farmers there. And I focused a lot on how to increase soil function through adding carbon into the soil. I got an opportunity to return to Kansas, that's where I'm from, in 2015 and jumped on it. And so I continued to do research while I was science instructor at Pratt Community College. And Pratt, it so happens, is where our Prairie Food plant is. And so I connected with Prairie Food at that time, and they needed a soil scientist to analyze all the data coming in from the field trials. And so ever since then, I've worked with Prairie Food and eventually became the Director of Regenerative Ag. So that's a little bit about me. What's next, Liz?
Thanks, Trish. I'm so excited. And Trish and I met in Lawrence, Kansas at an event that Prairie Food was at. I don't think we met before that, but instantly connected. Super glad we have very long conversations about soils. Even yesterday we did. But I know you wanted to share you have some slides and share a little bit about Prairie Food and what y'all are doing. So I'd like for you to do that now if you could.
Okay, sure. So let me tell you a little bit about Prairie Food before I start out on the slides. We are taking waste biomass products. And so one of those is, for example, cattle manure from feedlots. And then another ingredient we're using is wet distiller's grain from an ethanol plant. And our Pratt plant is located right in between those two facilities. So we don't have a big transportation cost, but we're taking those two biomasses and adding water and putting it through our process, and out comes this liquid gold. It's a liquid slurry product that's full of microcarbons. And the whole idea behind it is that it feeds the soil. So I want to talk a little bit about how that works. I know a lot of you on this call have better than basic understanding of regenerative ag and how soil functions. So it's a little bit higher level than I usually go. Yesterday, I was at the Fuel Ethanol Workshop in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and giving a presentation on the soil food web. So I'm going to use a couple of those slides because I really like thinking about soil holistically like that. But it was really stunning to me that there is this lack of knowledge in some circles that really grow a lot of crops, corn in particular, in that setting, about how the soil functions. And so I was really glad to have the opportunity to be at that event and start opening some of the minds, hopefully, about soil function. So let me share my screen here. Sorry, I know how to do this. I also got in at 2:30 in the morning, so I'm a little bit not on the top of my game as I normally would be. Okay, so here is the slide, which is now, oh, here we go. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that now. Can you see that, Liz?
Yeah, it looks great. And you look fresh as a daisy.
Well, thank you. That's what friends are for. Okay, so here's this pretty good representation of the soil food web. I mean, obviously it's simplified quite a bit, but that helps us just kind of stick to the main points, right? I really like this because it shows that it starts with the plant and the energy coming into the system from solar energy. And we have these amazing technology, you know, of plants that capture energy and convert it into carbon sugars. People can't do that. So we rely on plants to do that. And so there's an interesting concept in the literature right now, and it's this idea of the soil microbial carbon pump. And the idea behind this is that we have the plant that is converting carbon dioxide into plant sugars, flushing those down into the soil, feeding the microbiology. The microbes grow, proliferate, and die. And then a large part of soil organic matter is actually dead microbial bodies. So 30 to 50% of soil organic matter are dead microbes. What's interesting about that is that in the past, soil scientists were pretty convinced that soil organic matter was complex, but a constantly fluctuating soil carbon source. It wasn't really stable in the soil. It was more unstable. What we're finding is those microbial bodies in the soil are more recalcitrant, is what we called it. They're more stable in the soil. So really, if we can encourage that soil biology to work really well, now we have long-term carbon storage and we have more stable soil organic matter. And so as that cycle spins, if we can get that functioning properly, then we get, you know, bigger plants. They photosynthesize more, and so they grow more. They flush more carbon down into the soil. You get more abundance of microbes because they have plenty of food from the plants to eat. And as a result of that, now all of a sudden you don't need as many inputs. And we're not only getting carbon from the atmosphere, we're getting nitrogen too. There's nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil. In a lot of these systems, it's just dormant because we've broken that connection between the plant and the soil. So where PrairieFood comes into this is that we're almost mimicking that carbon food that feeds the soil biology, and we're priming the soil microbial carbon pump. We're getting that process moving. And you can see that here's a picture where you have corn. This is just from this season, taken a few weeks ago. We have IF means 10 gallons per acre of PrairieFood applied in furrow. So this grower really wanted to compare PrairieFood in furrow compared to his normal starter, where he had his starter fertilizer, which usually has a little bit of NPK in it. So you can see the difference here. You can see all of that glue, that microbial glue, and those root exudates are creating the situation where you have this really active root zone where the PrairieFood is. So you're starting to take advantage of that soil microbial carbon pump to get the photosynthesis moving faster, getting more carbon flushed into the soil, and the biology just takes off and explodes. The other thing I want to highlight on this slide is those red circles on the left where you see nutrients released. So in every single trophic level. So, you know, our two main categories of the bottom of the food chain in the soil are the fungi and the bacteria. Well, if you only have bacteria and you don't have a lot of fungi, for example, you're missing out on all the nutrient cycling that all those trophic levels perform for you. And so one of the things I was trying to point out to these corn growers and these ethanol producers is we should be partnering with this system to reduce our inputs, because there's a lot of free services out there that have been cut off by conventional practices. And everybody loves this slide. Maybe you've seen it before, from Kiss the Ground. I like to show it and say, which world do you want to live in? And that, you know, I get lots of chuckles, but the truth of the matter is we're doing what's on the left. Most of crop production right now is what's happening on the left. And people, I feel like they want to do what's on the right. They want to do regenerative ag, but they're having a hard time finding a way to make that transition. So what I love about Soil Regen, Liz and Russell's group, is that they're helping farmers make those decisions on the farm on how to make that transition. Okay, so I want to look at these two specific challenges here that farmers are experiencing. And one of them is that in conventional systems, we have soils that are really bacterial dominated a lot because of disturbance, mainly, you know, physical disturbance, biological and chemical disturbance has broken that system down. And so now you have mainly just bacteria dominating there. And so you have tiny little nutrient cycle not working for us. We're not utilizing that whole entire system. So we're limiting the nutrient cycling. We're limiting nutrient use efficiency. And if you haven't read Liz's dissertation, sorry, Liz, it's good though, it's good. She talks about—
Trish is the only human on earth that has read my dissertation.
It's good, but it's about nutrient use efficiency. How much do we really need to get, you know, to maximize yield? And so for every pound of input, you want to maximize yield, right? And so if you just have this tiny little nutrient cycle, you're limiting nutrient use efficiency. And so you have to dump more inputs into that system to get the yields that you're looking for, since you're not taking advantage here. And let's not talk about the dirty little secret of agriculture, which is that we are poisoning the water, which is poisoning then ourselves. We get lots of nutrient mobility in these poor soil situations. And then when you use more synthetics, for example, you're volatilizing a lot of nitrogen as well. But I digress. What is the solution to this? How do we restore soil biology and get that function working for us? Well, I would argue we need to get that biology out of dormancy, woken up, working for us. So one way to do that is to feed it. And so what Prairie Food does is it feeds the whole thing. It feeds all the way from the bacteria through the earthworms, because it's got tiny little carbons in it, and it's got, you know, larger carbon molecules in it. It feeds the soil a buffet of carbon. So it gets that whole system humming and started up. It's priming that carbon pump. And so now, instead of a tiny little nutrient cycle, we have this huge entire soil food web working for us. And so we get that soil restoring, regenerating. And the first thing that we see happen is the microbial biomass expands. So that just means you're getting more microbes, right? But the really, really important one here is that the diversity increases. So we have a lot of companies out there right now that are promoting this idea of their biologics. But what we've found out is if you add Prairie Food to the system, there's all the biology's there. It's just dormant. It's not really working for us right now. So as soon as you get that pump primed, all of a sudden, all those things come out of dormancy and this diversity starts to show up. in ecology 101, right? The more diverse an ecosystem is, the more resilient it is. And so don't we want that in our agricultural systems, to have some resiliency against drought and pests and disease? And so this is a really big result that we're finding in our studies with Prairie Food. So then, of course, you get your functions working for you. You get more nutrient cycling and retention. So not only do you have guys showing up like nitrogen fixing bacteria, you have predators showing up like protozoa over here that eat the bacteria, and what they poop out is this amazing plant food. And so it's all of these things are so important to cycle nutrients and to keep those nutrients from leaching into our waterways or running off because the soil is eroding. So remember that glue from soil biology helps with aggregation. And so we can increase nutrient use efficiency. So there's that, for every pound of input you're putting in, higher yield, but you also get things like higher yields for lower inputs, reduced water pollution. And then what I was kind of starting to get to was when you get that better aggregation in the soil, more carbon working in the system, you have all of a sudden a sponge for water. And so that helps not only reduce erosion, but increase your storage of water for those dry years like we know we're having. Okay. Should I pause there for questions, or should I just finish here? We have just one more kind of concept I wanted to get to here. What do you think, Liz?
Well, we have one question. It's, how does Prairie Food compare with biochar? So I don't know if you want to answer that now or when you get done with this slide, or it's up to you.
Okay. I can talk about that in a minute. So the second challenge that I wanted to talk about is the broken soil microbial carbon pump, that concept I talked about at the very beginning. Why wouldn't we want that working for us? So many conventional systems have completely broken the connection between the plant and the soil. So if the soil biology is not there and the plant's doesn't have to feed the soil biology by flushing carbon down into the soil, the whole connection is broken. If you're trying to feed plants directly with synthetics, that it just kind of makes the soil not have to do its job. And so it's not transforming nutrients as it should be. The plants don't have to feed the soil biology like it's designed to do. So you get this broken connection there. So that X is to show you you're cutting yourself off from that soil food web, that whole nutrient cycling machine that Mother Nature designed. So then you get depletion of soil organic matter. You're limiting your root development on your plants. You have to use more inputs to get the same yields. And then you get addicted to chemicals, right? You get kind of stuck in this loop of chemical usage. So again, the solution is we need to enhance that, solve it, reconnect it, get it working for us again. And so Prairie Food does that. That's the first thing that we see when you get Prairie Food down on the ground. The first signal that we see is microbial activity appears, more soil respiration from soil biology. And so the plants respond to that. And that's the next thing that we can see that's visual, that doesn't even require a soil test, is that you get these big roots forming on these tiny little, emerging plants when we do root digs, and you get all that cool microbial glue in the root zone. And so we're helping restore that connection. Okay, I just got a note that my internet was unstable. Is everybody still following me? Are you okay? Okay, I'm going to keep going.
You sound good.
Okay, good. So when we have more microbes, we get the more diversity, like I said before. And so you start getting that connection going. The plants grow the bigger root systems. They start photosynthesizing more because they need to feed those microbes that are helping release nutrients to them. So it's this virtuous cycle, right? That we've repaired. But the communication between the plants and the soil is as it should be, as Mother Nature designed. So now we're pulling carbon into the soil. We're getting that microbial carbon pump working for us again. And now it's raining carbon, apparently, into the soil. So when you get that humming along and that process gets hummed along faster, it gets to that point faster with Prairie Food, we get to that point where it's working for us faster. That is a huge argument for using Prairie Food, especially when you're transitioning out of conventional systems and towards regenerative systems. It gets you started a little bit faster, quite a bit faster is what our data is showing. So that's my summary about Prairie Food. It's a microcarbon rich slurry. We feed the micro and macro fauna in the soil, and it catalyzes the soil microbial carbon pump. The restoration of soil function is what we're looking for. So you can get that benefit from Mother Nature. We don't have to work as hard as we've been working to use fossil fuels and refine them and make chemicals out of them and then transport them to the field and get them on the field. We're kind of fighting ourselves. And so why not simplify and partner with Mother Nature? Okay, so this is from a case study that we did last year. We had this feed yard in Southwest Kansas, and they came to us and said, we have declining yields, even though we've increased inputs. We've tried a bunch of things. We have to irrigate more because we don't have the soil organic matter to hold the water. They had salt issues from poor quality irrigation water. And so they did some amazing things. They allowed us to go in and study it too, where they completely took off their whole entire synthetic program and let us just go all in with only Prairie Food and compare it to their side by side with their synthetic program, their normal fertility program. And it was awesome what we saw, because we really took a lot of data there and we looked at the biology in addition to the plant tissue and the soils. So we saw this really cool soil response where nutrient availability was increasing over the course of the growing season. And what we figured out was they had this legacy load of manure. So it was a feedlot, that, basically grows their own feed for their cattle. And they were manuring a lot, but there wasn't the biology wasn't there in order to transform that manure into the nutrients the plant needed. So they still had to add a bunch of synthetics to that program. So when we put Prairie Food down on that legacy load of manure and the biology started working, all of a sudden, as the biology started repairing itself, we saw nitrogen and phosphorus in particular increase in availability through the growing season. Even though the plant was growing and taking up those nutrients, we saw it increase through time. So that was a pretty awesome result. On the synthetic fields, we saw that nutrient availability declined through the growing season because it was just artificially being fed, and the biology was kind of being usurped from its normal job. And so it didn't have to do its thing. So here's what we found when we looked at the biology. The microbial biomass increased, so there's more microbes, the diversity increased. One of the first signals we saw is this burst in nitrogen fixing bacteria. So a lot of biologics are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Well, it's there already in your soil. You just have to get that system working for you and wake those guys up that have not been doing their jobs. So those nitrogen fixing bacteria show up. The fungal populations were bouncing back. And then the predators, the guys on that soil food web that eat the bacteria, they showed up next. And then that's when we really saw lots of nutrient cycling happening. And so here we go, the soil food web now in one growing season over the course of just a few months, we saw that bouncing back. It was really cool. And I'd be happy to share any more data with anybody if they're interested in that. So let me talk about the biochar question real quick here. I did a lot of work in biochar in South Dakota and in Kansas. I actually visited the Brazilian Amazon to go look at the Amazonian dark earths, or the terra preta there, which is the original biochar enriched soil. It's amazing there because that soil, that anthropogenic soil made by people, is thousands of years old now. One of the sites I worked on was over 3,000 years old, and it's still dark, black earth, which is really remarkable because in tropical systems, you get leaching. You don't have, you have oxasols and alpha sols. So they're just basically iron oxide or aluminum oxide, not a lot of life because it's so leached out. And so all the life is happening, in the top part of the soil. Well, in the terra preta, these guys figured it out thousands of years ago, how to make this soil, and biochar was part of that. And in addition to pottery shards and trash, and there was this certain biology that co-evolved with that land management practice that makes that work. But one of the biggest lessons I learned from the Amazon is the older that soil was, the older that biochar was, the finer the particles were. And that's when it started really working. And so today, when we start trying to think about using biochar in agricultural systems, there's a lot of logistical issues with that. It's expensive to make, and then that makes it expensive to buy. It's just really labor intensive. And you have to get it right. So for example, you have to burn that char at a certain temperature. You have to get it to a minimum temperature, or else it's not good for soil. It actually can be toxic to soil. Likewise, you don't want to go over a certain temperature when you're making biochar, because that's not good for soil either. So there's kind of a sweet spot. So there's some things that people that are getting biochar from like a power plant, you need to know some things about that before you're using it as a soil amendment. And then back to the idea of this fine particle size. Biochar is huge chunks, and you can grind it up and try to break that down. But when you put that down in the soil, it's not really ready for being a food for biology. It needs time to break down and break down and break down. Plus, you need to inoculate it with life, or else it outcompetes the plants for nutrients and water at first. So there's a lot of practices and education that need to happen in order to make biochar viable as a good soil amendment, and finding a way to apply it is another issue. So Prairie Food, by contrast, is also a very carbon rich soil amendment, right? So that's one of the things that it has in common with biochar. But Prairie Food comes with ready to go, ready to be consumed by all the soil biology. You don't have to inoculate it. It doesn't outcompete plants for water and nutrients. It's just ready to go. It's like it has all the way from cotton candy to kale. I mean, it has the whole thing, the whole buffet for the soil to eat. So that's my conclusion about biochar. It's not a bad thing, but there's some challenges there. Liz, are there other questions?
Yeah, can you see Jim's question on? Yeah, Jim is interested in hearing more about using corn ethanol distiller grain as a source for making your products. Is it being used for making a protein hydrolysate?
There's certain things I can say about our process and certain things I can't. What I can say is what's going into our process is unrecognizable when it comes out the other end. And so really the magic sauce of Prairie Food is that we're generating microcarbons out of these feedstocks. We have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 10:1. So there is some nitrogen in there. There's, some micronutrients in there, some phosphorus, but the real important piece here that soil biology needs is that microcarbon food. That's another question here. Let me stop sharing so I can look at this a little bit easier.
The other ones were compliments.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good job, Liz.
Yeah. So, okay, you said a couple things I want to ask questions on.
Okay.
You talked about the microcarbon, and I know you've done a lot of testing. Does that correspond to water extractable organic carbon and nitrogen that you're seeing in your soil samples?
I don't quite understand where.
So like if you took a non-treated field versus a treated field, do you see rises in water extractable organic carbon and nitrogen? Because what we always talk about with the Haney test is that that is a measurement of the easily digestible carbon sources that the microbes are going to go after first. So I'm wondering if you've also seen that in your research.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the first major findings from our 2020 strip trials. Every single field that we measured had an increase in water extractable organic carbon. And so we were trying to understand what was happening at that time. Why is this working so well? Because we were seeing increases in yields, increases in microbial activity, increases in soil organic matter. And so those kinds of measurements from the Haney test were really helping us see that basically the soil function was starting to work as it should because of the biological activity. So yes, we have seen those things, those signals show up over the course of just one growing season. That's what's so astounding too, is how if you stop beating up Mother Nature and start helping her, then all of a sudden you turn it around pretty fast. And I know that others have seen that when they start using regenerative techniques. What other questions do you have, Liz?
Hey, Trish.
Oh.
I don't know if my internet froze, but or yours did, but can you repeat that?
Sure. How about now? Is it okay now? Sorry, y'all. I'm in a hotel because when I got back from Minneapolis. Uh-oh. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna try putting on my hotspot.